Namaskar and welcome. After a highly successful run last year, the informative Health4All show enters season 2, this time supported by IHL. We thank IHL for reposing faith in us on this important mission of spreading the right information on health and medicine to one and all. As usual, we would strive to maintain the high standard that we had set for ourselves in season 1. In these times of fad diets and quick weight loss programs, diabetes remission has become a topic of hot discussion, especially on social media platforms. While such a remission is possible for some people with type 2 diabetes, type 1 diabetes is not reversible. However, there are many facets about remission of diabetes which people are not aware of. In the natural history of type 2 diabetes, there is the stage of normal glucose tolerance, followed by a stage of pre-diabetes, and finally diabetes. This progression is well known, but less known is the fact that some people can also move in the opposite direction, that is, from diabetes to pre-diabetes and then to the normal stage. According to the American Diabetes Association, the correct term, usually people use reversal, but that's not correct for diabetes, is remission of diabetes. Although they are used interchangeably, there is a subtle difference in the meaning. Reversal implies diabetes would never come back. As this rarely occurs, the right term is remission. This is similar to cancer going into remission. To speak more on this, we have eminent nutritionist and wellness coach, Ms. Manjari Chandra with us. She's the founder of Manjari Wellness. Welcome, Ms. Manjari, as usual. Glad to have you on our show.
Glad to be here. It's really a pleasure speaking to you, Shankar. So it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. To start off, Ms. Manjari, there are several treatment options to achieve remission. But the underlying factor, as I said in my intro, is lifestyle changes. What are the lifestyle changes you suggest to attain remission? And who are the people who can adopt these lifestyle changes in order to attain remission?
Can I answer it in a different way, Shankar sir?
Sure. Go ahead.
I'd like to start from the top, sir. You see, lifestyle is something that we do with ourselves, what we eat, when we sleep, how much we move, what stressors we carry, what pollutants and environmental toxins we get exposed to, what medications we take. That becomes a part of our overall epigenetics and lifestyle factors. Now, when WHO coined the word non-communicable diseases, it is also used interchangeably with lifestyle diseases. So all these conditions of diabetes, hypertension, fatty livers, obesity, high cholesterols, and many more are called lifestyle diseases or non-communicable diseases. That means that they do not happen because of an infection or an external agent, but happen more because of what we do with our lives every day, our lifestyles. And because they are driven by lifestyle, by any normal logic and by scientific research, we know that the correction of these conditions also lies in lifestyle. Now, but though this is a broader statement to make, who is where in that stage of the disease, how much is the prognosis, what is happening, what is the dependence on drugs? There are many factors that can change in different people and change the way the disease can be conquered or put into remission. Those individual parameters may change, but on the whole, it's actually a lifestyle disease. And just one more thing, sorry, but conventional medicine has confused lifestyle diseases with diseases that are dependent on pharmaceutical management. So diabetes is not a disease which compulsorily requires pharmaceutical intervention or pharmacological management. It's a disease which requires intervention in food and lifestyle. And that is a thing that was not looked at completely, actually not even researched completely scientifically. But now we know for many years that many people can overcome and get out of diabetes. Of course, there are underlying factors that we have to consider, but overall, it's a disease that can go into remission. And we can get into the details of the lifestyle, maybe with what you say with your next question, sir.
Yeah. Now, there are several treatment options to achieve remission, but the major one is a lifestyle modification is through low-calorie diet, or around, if I'm right, 800 calories per day. That's one aspect which you can answer. Second, I'll come to the second aspect later. So you can answer on this low-calorie diet.
So my problem is with the word calorie. It is really not calorie, it's low carbohydrate. Even proteins break down into energy, fats break down into energy. So all macronutrients are sources of energy for the body at some point or the other. Besides their primary function, proteins are building blocks, fats make our hormones and neurotransmitters and our tissue linings. Carbohydrates are primarily energy sources of food. The problem is that we don't require the type of energy we consume through our food. So we need less carbohydrates. So it's essentially a low carbohydrate diet where you reduce the consumption of carbohydrates. It is carbohydrates that chemically break down into glucose in the body. So as we reduce the consumption of carbohydrates, we can reduce the circulating blood levels of glucose. And after a point of time, if done under control and with help, the people can come to a stage where eventually whatever high levels of glucose they were having come back to normal. And as a further consequence, actually, we're not just targeting reducing glucose in the blood, we're also targeting correcting the underlying physiology of diabetes, which is insulin resistance, the behavior of insulin and the sensitivity of our cells to insulin. So it is not really a low-calorie diet. It is a low-carbohydrate diet where you are requested to restrict your consumption of simple and even some complex carbohydrates. Shankar sir.
Well, you made a very crucial statement in the beginning that actually you are against, or you don't completely agree with the pharmacological intervention on drugs and other things. So I will take a practical example. Now, if there is a person who is around, say, 35, 30 to 35, comes with diabetes, not a runaway diabetes, but neither is it is a pre-diabetic state, but has concrete diabetes. Now, would you suggest that he should stop his diet, stop his medicines and go back just to lifestyle changes? Or would you say he should continue with the drugs, reduce it, at the same time increase his lifestyle changes? Your views?
Definitely, it's a gradual shift. It's not a one, it's not a cold turkey situation. People come in with medication, and over time, they can reduce and titrate their medications as their blood sugars start correcting, as they need less medicines to manage their blood sugars and are able to manage it more with changes in their food and lifestyle, eventually coming to a point where the drug is of no use and is not really required to keep the blood sugars under control. It is a gradual process. Like diabetes, which develops over time, the remission is also something that takes a significant amount of time and effort to happen.
Quite rightly said. Now, I'll take the example of the same person. What are the, you said reduce carbohydrates. So for the common person, what exactly should the substitute be, and how drastic should be the carbohydrate reduction? Do you say from tomorrow you stop it, or you gradually say reduce carbohydrates? And which are the food materials that contain carbohydrates in the Indian scenario?
Yeah. So there are two parts to this story. One is the poor quality carbohydrates, which should be completely stopped. Even if I'm not diabetic, I should not be eating cookies and bread and processed cornflakes and anything that is made with maida or white rice or processed food. So that is one category of carbohydrates that should be dropped completely, not just from a diabetic patient's diet, but even from my diet if I do not want to fall prey to any form of disease. The second category of carbohydrates is complex and healthy carbohydrates: millets, lentils, beans, legumes, healthy vegetables and fruits. Initially, when we are trying to put a person into remission, especially reduce his insulin and medicine, we request him to go off many of these good carbohydrates also, because we need a biochemical change in the body. We want the body to manage with very little insulin or to correct its insulin resistance. So for some time, typically 6 weeks to 3 months, very low carbs are required. Even the good carbs are restricted. Over time, once things start falling in place, then the good carbs are introduced back. We call it carb cycling. We introduce small amounts of carbs, see the impact on blood sugar until a person starts tolerating regular carbohydrates. We still never go back to bread and white polished rice and polished maida and cookies and noodles. That is still always excluded.
Now, a common myth, especially among youngsters, is that, that bread is good, and especially they go in for wheat bread, which they consider as healthy. Number one. Number two is, there's a wide advertisement for cornflakes, so that it contains iron, micronutrients, this, that, everything else. So it's a very healthy breakfast. What's your viewpoint on this, both bread and cornflakes?
Let's first talk about the cornflakes. First and foremost, it's really sad that, industry has the wherewithal to change our perceptions by using some amount of messaging that they have the capacity to do with various channels across communication channels that are available. That may really not be the correct thing all the time. What they convey to us is maybe a part of the, selling, branding, marketing exercise. What you consume is really got nothing to do with what somebody else is telling you, especially the industry, which is saying cornflakes is good because cornflakes is what they make and they sell to you. Yes. So in fact, I would go to the extent of saying I could eat a bowl of cornflakes for breakfast or eat 4 teaspoons of sugar. For my body, it's the same thing. All that corn is eventually going to immediately break down into sugar in the body. It just doesn't look like sugar. It looks like something healthier and proclaims to be healthy, but it is a poor quality of food and very poor quality of breakfast to start your day with. The second bit is wheat or wheat bread. to start with, there is no wheat bread or brown bread. That's again more like, we think that things which are less white may be healthier for us. And so we want sometimes go for brown or wheat bread. But that's also mostly made from maida. There may be very small amount of caramel or wheat added to it or color added to it, sir. And again, for the body, it's still simple sugar, and it is going to break down into sugar. It's going to cause the insulin spikes to happen. In fact, just one more thing, we use something called the continuous glucose monitor. Everybody knows about it, and I think one of the ways in which we work with diabetes is try to tell a patient to put a CGM and see how his blood reacts after eating a food. I mean, that's not something that I am saying or in research. It's something that his body is saying to him. Yes. And that's an easy way to understand why these foods are not recommended, not just for non-diabetic people, but even for people who want to stay healthy.
So if you suggest that bread is not good, cornflakes is not good, what's the substitute for a person who is in a hurry and wants to go to the office? Because these are all substitutes. People who are on the run, they have these things. So what's the substitute? Is oats good?
Sorry, that's like, the poorer cousin. But I think we have to do a little bit of introspection and go back to where we come from. 50 years back, I mean, we were all eating without bread and cornflakes. 100 years back, there was no white sugar available and we were all eating food. Yes. So I think the convenience of these foods is definitely something that is difficult to beat. Having said that, thought into what we eat, when we eat, is extremely important. Our food literally makes my body. It's the biomolecules from which my tissues and hormones and enzymes are made. And there is no way poor quality food can make good quality health. So there are no easy ways out. There's nothing you can mix into milk and eat right away, but there are a lot of good options available that we do in our Indian homes, from basic pancakes to sauteed vegetables, to grilled paneer, to boiled eggs, to generally, and in our homes, we also have batter ready, which you can just roll out into a pancake and have with some vegetables by the side. So there's a lot. I think it's more about planning and putting a thought to it. And, it's not so cumbersome if you start thinking a bit about what you want to eat and how you're going to get it arranged.
So when you say pancake and other things, would idli and dosha fall into the category?
Not when you're into diabetes remission, but otherwise, yes. Good homemade batter with dosa, with lots of good vegetables and sambar and coconut chutney is a wholesome meal. But not when a person is in remission, not when they're trying to get diabetes out of their life.
So as a substitute to cornflakes and oats, are millets good?
Definitely. Ragi pancakes. We make ragi ganji in Karnataka. Ragi porridge is breakfast that people have, So all those are any day better than eating out of a packet.
Reminding me of Karnataka, Karnataka has another strange dish called ragi mudde.
Yes.
I don't know if that is
of course, I worked in Bangalore. I used to work.
Oh, yeah, you worked in Bangalore. Yes, correct.
And I know what ragi mudde is, because those are balls. We've made it ourselves that you eat with sambar, which are super healthy and so filling. You can't eat more than one at a time.
That's quite right. In fact, the farmers in Karnataka used to have one ball of ragi mudde and then go out to work and then eat only in the evening because it is so filling. So that's one good substitute.
Yes.
So, Mr. Chandri, I'll just come to another aspect, is that when there are people who use low carbohydrate diet of less than 10% are also widely used for remission. The problem with low carbohydrate diet is that it will considerably increase the fat content in the diet, which can increase the bad cholesterol or the LDL and thus raise the risk of heart disease. What are your viewpoints?
I'm going to take the liberty of, quoting Dr. Atkins, who actually had his heart in the right place, but messed it up a little bit. He spoke about something called the ketogenic diet, where you reduce the carbs significantly and pull up the fats. What, it's really ironical that Dr. Atkins died of his own diet. He had a massive cardiac arrest, and that was because when he reduced carbs, he picked up too much on animal fat, a lot of meat and red meat, which was not the right way of reducing carbohydrates. Reducing carbohydrates does not necessarily mean you have to pick up on only fat. You actually have to pick up on vegetables. Those become your number one friends. So dinner is sometimes vegetable kebabs with a little paneer with a cup of soup, So it's the vegetables that should replace your grains and millets, and not fat. Yes, good fat to some amount has to be added, but the whole concept of adding too much fat is obviously wrong. By the way, fat is my good friend and your good friend, and all of us, have unnecessarily villainized something which is actually most crucial for our physiology. And but excess of that is also, of course, not okay. So you have to cut down carbs, but add on vegetables, add on nuts and seeds, and not really only add fat.
So when you say fat, what exactly do you mean in the Indian
Good
context?
fat. Good fat is essentially fat which either comes from, something in India we call clarified butter or ghee, which is, when cream is cooked and the ghee is isolated. Any form of good quality plant-based fat, which are not liquid seed oils. For example, coconut oil, olive oil, sesame oil, which is used in India, even mustard oil, because in North Indians are used to having a lot of cold pressed mustard oil. These are good fats. And then, of course, the good fats are nuts and seeds, which somehow we have just stopped eating, whereas they used to be seeds, by the way. Every state in India would eat seeds in some form, but now we're not eating them, and now people are getting back to it. Nuts and all forms of local regional nuts are good sources of fat. So those are good fats. The poor quality fats are the inflammatory ones. Liquid oils, sunflower oil, canola oil, all forms of poor quality liquid oils are what are bad fats, which are inflammatory fats, basically.
Everybody is not a candidate for diabetes reversal or rather remission. So who are the candidates who would fit enough, would actually benefit from remission?
So let's do the exclusions first. Who should be excluded from, who are the people who we think should be excluded from attempting remission? As he correctly said, which is well known as type 1 diabetes, wherein there are non-functional pancreas, so there is no insulin being produced. So it's insulin dependent. You have to take injectable insulin. That's one. Second category is something we called autoimmune diabetes, which is late onset diabetes, where some people are type 2, but because of having type 2 diabetes for more than 10-15 years, now they have gone into something what we call the type 1.5 diabetes, or autoimmune diabetes, where their diabetes is becoming more like type 1 and is staying less like a type 2 condition, where not only is there insulin resistance, but there is death of beta cells, and there is no very, very little chance that, things will get back to normal. So those are people, we call them the autoimmune, we call it the autoimmune diabetes. There are tests for it also. We can get autoimmune markers done to understand who has this form of diabetes. And then there are people who are extremely lean, who are not typically people who have abdominal fat. Like, for example, like Dr. Jingen mentioned, that the ones who are obese are the best candidates actually for diabetes remission, because in their case, it has happened due to ectopic, as he correctly said, ectopic and visceral fat accumulation. And those are the best candidates. And those who have poorer lifestyles, but there are certain people who have diabetes besides being lean, not having fat, and also following good lifestyles. If they have already done that bit, and then they may not be the ones who may be able to achieve it. But most people tend to have diabetes with obesity, even if it is not visible too much. It may be abdominal, visceral, with other things like high cholesterols, with other things like fatty liver. So these people are the candidates who can successfully get into remission. And I must say one more thing, which Dr. Jingan said, which is about the 6 months. So that's also one thing that we take as a standard marker, that from every 3 months, we repeat A1C, and he said 6.1, but we actually look at less than 5.7. And anybody who's crossing 5.7, it means that they're not really reversing it properly. It's only people who are able to maintain A1C levels less than 5.7 for 6 months at a time are the people who are actually correcting the insulin behavior and sensitivity.
Fine. Now I'll come back to your earlier statement, which you had said were two villains in your catalog of good diet. Is that one is ghee, and second is egg. Now most people have a misconception both these are bad guys. Now, of course, you don't agree to it. It's correct that they are good guys. But one thing is, how much should they take? How many eggs per week? Or what is the quantity of ghee that they should take per week?
So ghee is, it's easy to understand that if that is the primary thing then in which all your food is being cooked and you're eating it as a primary fat, then you can have liberal amounts of it, which means I can have up to 3 to 6 teaspoons, considering I'm not eating any other fat. If I'm adding other forms of oils like olive oil or coconut oil, or I'm eating nuts and seeds, then obviously I go down on. So it has to be a balancing act. Nobody is saying go ahead and have bowls of ghee. Yes. The second bit is more important, the egg bit that you spoke about, because one, the myth that yellow is the bad part of the egg is a complete myth. I don't know where it came from. It's literally as old as the chicken and the egg story. But the yellow is actually the good guy. That is what contains the zinc, magnesium, all your minerals and vitamins. The white albumin is actually a poor quality protein and is not easily broken down by the body. So the whole egg is a good egg. The problem with egg is the eggs that are sold in the markets now are laden with, a lot of antibiotics and hormones. So you have to procure good quality eggs. You have to ensure they come from hens which just feed on, grass fed, as we call it, hens, and are not given injections to have too many eggs, are not, force bred. So that's one. Second is that a lot of people we meet now are going crazy with eggs. Their trainers tell them to eat 8 eggs, 10 eggs a day to make muscle. And there are people who are doing that. So obviously that's not, nobody would logically eat that much. You can have a couple or 3 or 4 eggs if you're mostly vegetarian and not eating too much meat. But if you eat meat, maybe 2 or 3 eggs are more than sufficient, whole eggs with the yellow, of course.
Fine. Actually speaking, now it's become a sort of a fashion statement or a fad, that when you sit on a dining table with friends and I hear people saying, oh yeah, you give me egg, but only the white. And people think, oh, that guy is healthy. Actually, it is not the case at all.
Correct. So it's sad that all the yellows are going down the drain, all the nutrition.
In fact, what I do is whenever there is such a person, I say, please give me the yellow. I don't mind.
So one more thing about egg, if you see classically, especially how Europeans and other people who are native people who eat eggs, they would always half cook the eggs, never overcook. The yellow would be gooey always, it wouldn't be hard. And eggs are best eaten soft cooked or hard cooked. If you half cooked, if you overcook eggs, you cause a lot of changes to happen in the yellow, which are not the best for the body, really.
Fine. I think that's the best thing that one can do. Now, I'll come to another part is that, various technologies are being used nowadays for attempting remission. The most common is using mobile phones or a coach or a diabetes educator who keeps in touch with people and motivate them to achieve weight loss and to stick to their lifestyle modifications. What are your viewpoints?
Coaching can never be wrong as long as it is done with the right intent and the right objective in mind, which is what most people are attempting to do. I know that it is becoming a big business and, but everything is eventually a sort of business only. What I'm saying is that if a person is on insulin and drugs, the better time would for him obviously would be to have a life where he's not needing insulin and medicine to manage his blood sugars. And if that can happen through a program where there is a person who's constantly in touch with him, guiding him, there is technology which is enabling him to check how his body is reacting to what he's eating. There is somebody who's working with him on titrating his medications. There are some micronutrients also that need to be replenished when a person is trying to get into remission. For example, magnesium, vitamin D, vitamin B complex, folic acid have a major role to play. So what happens with these programs, I think, is that everything is brought under one roof. There is guidance, there is support, there is hand-holding. And there is, of course, somebody who's constantly following up so that the person who's trying to do it has a support system and technology. I mean, we're talking to each other through technology, so we can't discredit technology. Yes. So as long as it is used well and done properly, I think it's a win-win for everybody. Really.
Yeah. Speaking of coach and educators, I'll just come to another aspect. There are various apps which are used for this purpose, which count the steps that one takes per day and the calories in the diet, and provides constant feedback to the person to help achieve diabetes remission. The problem is that there is a lot of hype and false claims are also being made. What's your viewpoint?
I think you actually said the exactly correct thing. So I don't think I can add much to it. What I definitely can say that human beings make habits out of, when we were in school, we would write our homework in our diaries because, that is a way of reminding ourselves and telling others that this is the job we have at hand. So what happens with this form of, constant interaction is that you're focused and you're doing the right thing. But constantly counting steps and saying that doing so much step will never give you heart disease or, this form of food, that is over claiming and over, that's something that people are claiming because maybe it attracts eyeballs. I think fair claims, fair amount of work should be done, but it's human nature. We tend to, go a little aboard with things and, blow it out of proportion. How much can a watch help you? It can help you to monitor what you're doing. It can give you insights into how you slept and, how your blood sugars are, how your ECG is, how's your heartbeat. But it can't keep you free of disease completely. Yes. So those claims may be incorrect. Yes.
Fine. Now, I'll just quote a particular expert and I just want your viewpoint. He says, in most cases, remission occurs due to profound weight loss. If people regain weight, as they usually do, diabetes invariably comes back, often with a vengeance. While a few maintain remission for several years, in most people, diabetes comes back and they need to take medications again. Long-term sustainability is thus a problem with remission programs. Your viewpoint?
I do not endorse the statement. I think this is a very one-sided way of looking at it. I mean, even with weight loss, if I have put on weight, just weight, and I will have to do something to get it off my back. Whatever I do to get it off my back, whether I eat better, sleep better, exercise more, which is what I should be doing. If I stop doing it, the weight will obviously come back. Yes, if I go back to not moving and eating the wrong food, the weight will come back. I think it's a similar story with any disease or any physiological condition. So it goes without saying that if you don't follow the basics of health, then disease will become a part of your, because, one of my favorite quotes really is that being healthy is really not a default setting. Being sick is one, to be healthy, you have to work your back to stay there. So it's a designed setting to be healthy, and it takes work, it takes effort, it takes conscious eating and exercising and conscious living. And therefore, for anybody who's been able to correct their diabetes, they still continue to live mindfully, eat carefully, exercise, keep their weight in check. It's a no-brainer to say that if they don't do that, the disease will come back.
Yeah. One of the common aspects is that, especially among the lay public, is that they often feel that people who achieved remission assume that they have been cured of diabetes, cured within inverted commas. So is that right?
WHO has not really given any definition for what curing a disease would be. But in my head, curing means something that you get out of your way. Like, for example, if I get flu and I don't have it after 6 days, I'm cured of flu. Yes, that does not mean that ever in my life I will never get flu. I may get it again, maybe after 6 months. Yes, so curing is treating that condition at that point of time and living without it. Now, how long you can live with it is up to you. If I go back again and catch COVID because I exposed myself to people who already have it, then I think, sir, what the meaning of cure in diabetes is that a person has been on medication to manage his sugars and doesn't need them anymore is able to manage them with better food and lifestyle and keeping his weight in check, has cured the disease. Now it's his choice. Also, what happens, it's human nature. We're initially very motivated when we get into such programs. Yes, we tend to do it with all our zeal and enthusiasm. But as the results come and we become complacent. So once complacency sets in, then, poor quality food and things come back. And that's so curing or remission or reversal. We may use it interchangeably, although WHO has said that remission and reversal is different. But I think it's completely a person's prerogative where he wants to be with a particular disease. By the way, there are enough people who have cured themselves of cancer never to get it back again. So yeah.
Yeah. Now, I'll come back to another statement again. This is in case of, people who are acute diabetic patients. So the statement goes as follows. It doesn't matter if you don't achieve remission. Some have celebrated their 100th birthday despite having diabetes for 60 to 70 years and have continued their medications lifelong. I know you're against pharmacological interventions, but keeping your diabetes under control and going for regular checkups are the key to a long and healthy lifestyle despite diabetes. These are cases of acute diabetic patients.
So this is actually chronic. I believe that a person who's had diabetes for a long time and is able to manage it with his medication and a little bit of lifestyle changes. Sadly, as far as we know, whatever we've seen in hospitals and as far as literature and science knows, diabetes becomes a progressive disease. Over time, over 10s and 20s of years, when you tend to have that disease, the constant imbalance of sugar and the medications also make permanent impacts on many of our essential organs, the liver, the kidney. They also affect your vision. They also affect many other things. We know about the complications of diabetes. So I really don't know of many people who I have. In one of the hospitals, I used to work in the endocrinology ward for 2 years, only exclusively did diabetes. And I have not seen many people live a very healthy life with diabetes. They've gotten into complications. If not very serious, they've at least become extremely sick, very frail, and have become very weak with the disease. Some of them have gone into kidney failure. Some of them have gone into gangrenes and peripheral neuropathy. So most people have complications. There may be a few cases who may be okay. I don't think that is the norm in diabetes. Typically, diabetes is a complicated disease and the prognosis tends to be poor for whatever reason. The reasons are not just the disease. Actually, the reasons, sir, are also the drugs. The drugs are nephrotoxic and hepatotoxic in nature.
Manchini, you just heard Dr. Rakesh Jain on bariatric surgery and how it plays an important role in remission, especially due to the reduction of obesity. What's your viewpoint?
So there are only few people who are candidates for bariatric surgery. As he said, over obese. So we call it morbid obesity. People with a BMI of more than 38 or more are candidates who are are candidates for bariatric surgery. So not everybody has a BMI of 38. So if the person has a BMI of 40 or more or 38 or more, then they are candidates for bariatric surgery because that's the underlying, guideline. So obviously, what happens, sir, is for people who are morbidly obese and they have crossed 100, 120 kgs, sometimes losing that weight is so much of an uphill task that even after a lot of effort, it doesn't happen. That's where surgery can come as a big help to these people, not just for losing weight, but if they are diabetic, then because they tend to eat very little, and of course, because lap sleeve gastrectomy allows the ghrelin hormone not to be produced in the body, the diabetes also can go into remission, and it is seen with bariatric surgery. But not everybody can get bariatric surgery done. It is only people who are morbidly obese who need that surgery.
Fine. Now, you see, what happens is India is supposed to become the diabetic capital of the world. We are various heart capital, also diabetic capital. Now, why is this runaway diabetes happening? Is it because of lifestyle changes, or is it because, especially youngsters, or is it because of the type of food we eat? And also, we eat the right food, but as you had mentioned briefly before, there are a lot of these growth hormones that come in. So we see children getting obese, children getting taller, and girls attaining their puberty at a very early age. So all these factors do play in. So what's the solution to this?
Solution is just clean living. I think getting back to basics, cooking our own food. There are enough people in the world, the biggest doctors and researchers, who have said that one of the simple solutions to any disease is to go back to your kitchen and cook your own food, procure your own ingredients and not depend on, just something that comes out of packet and claims to be so. So simple things like, for example, we were talking about ghee, sir. So, a lot of people just buy ghee and think that it is the right ghee. Whereas traditionally in India, ghee came from our own houses. It was made in our own houses and used. That's how it never came out of a box. And then it was started, then we started selling it. So if you're buying ghee, then that ghee has to be ghee. It cannot be adulterated. Otherwise, it's not ghee and it's not going to give you the benefit that it is supposed to give you. So I think one of the simple things to attempt is to cook your own food or eat real food which is cooked in your own kitchen, which you have an understanding to. I think the second thing would be to eat less. Another problem with our generation, I'm sorry to say, and the present urban setup is that food and pleasure have become synonymous with each other. We eat mostly to pleasure ourselves and less to nourish ourselves. So once we, disassociate food with pleasure and start eating food to nourish our bodies, I think we'll become much more mindful of what we are putting into our bodies. And we try to get into specifics, but we don't correct the environment around us. What is the food? Where is it coming from? Who's cooking it? When was it cooked? Simple things that our mothers and grandmothers were extremely particular about, I think the starting point would be cooking our food and eating less. Two simple things that we can. And of course, not eating things that are alien to our palate. Why should we eat cookies for snack? Indians make every snack from theplas to idlis to everything that you can think of. We make pakoras from the healthiest vegetables that are available on the planet. So I think cooking our own food is an extremely important step there.
So this so-called Shuddh ghee that we get in the markets, they're not as Shuddh as claim. Do you agree with that?
100%. Yes, that is why when we request our people to switch to ghee, we tell them either to make it themselves, get it made at home, or to get something called A2 cow ghee, which is the Gir cow, the Indian Gir cow, from which they make the ghee by cooking it, first curdling it and cooking it, and not what is just sold as ghee, really.
A lot of people have also this myth that when they buy, say, a cake of butter, cooking butter, and then they melt it or they process it to become ghee. Is that a healthy choice or?
Yeah, so now dairies sell something called white butter, which is actually what we made at home also. So that I think is slightly better. It's basically milk cream which has been churned into butter, and you can just cook it into ghee at home instead of starting from. You may not collect that much cream at home to make the ghee. So that is why that butter can be used to make ghee.
Yeah. Now, I'll just come to a series of myths regarding diabetes and also lifestyle and food habits. What should be one's ideal blood sugar level?
This is a guideline. It says that anything less than 100 for fasting and anything less than 130, 140 for your random or postprandial blood sugars. However, it is much better to have them much lower. In fact, there is enough study. There was a very famous study that Lancet had published recently, which said that if you are never cross 120 as your blood sugar levels, your risk for every cardiometabolic disease is extremely low, including cancer. So if my sugars never spike 120, that means that I have very less risk for any cardiovascular disease, including cancer. But sadly, it's very difficult because the minute I eat a piece of ice cream or a lolly or a candy, it's going to spike beyond 120. So, but postprandial is less than 130, 140, and fasting less than 9500 is the guideline. So,
which gives you an ideal marker, the fasting or the postprandial?
Fasting is always a more stricter marker of our blood sugar than the postprandial. Fasting shows how your insulin is working while you're sleeping, how much hormonal balancing is happening when you're sleeping, how your beta cells are behaving. So it's a much better.
But in some cases, what happens is your fasting blood sugar is normal, but your postprandial spikes up quite high. Why is that happening?
These are typically people who eat a large amount of, carbohydrate-rich food, a lot of rice and green. And so when they eat so much, the sugars spike too much, and 2 hours, they're not able to come back to the normal.
So you're saying that anything below 100 is always very good in the sense for any disease?
Yes, 120 is the threshold that enough research has already proven.
No, I'm asking about fasting.
Fasting, less than 100 is the guidelines.
Yeah. Now, are these uniform across ages and population, like Indian, Asian, Caucasian, other things, or is it specific to certain populations?
So we typically follow WHO. I mean, ICMR follows WHO. So our guidelines are what WHO has, and it is assumed that when these guidelines are put out, then the population representation has been done from every part of the world, whether it is this Indian subcontinent or the Caucasians or the African population. So it's an average of that or a mean of that. But that's why I was trying to say, sir, it's better to have your fastings much lesser than that, not 100, but much lesser than 80, 85 or less than that means that you're at very low risk. That is why if your A1C is always less than 5.7 and close to 5.5, your risk is very low for any disease. Not just diabetes, every other disease.
Good. Yeah. Now, what are the most common complications that come along with diabetes?
So there are a lot of them, but the primary ones, we call it, so the common ones as we know is, of course, diabetic retinopathy, neuropathy, nephropathy. These are the top ones that we know. Retinopathy, because the retina is a very, very sensitive film on the inner eye and the inner ball of the eye. And when your blood sugars are high, the retina starts degrading. And it is the retina where the inverted image is formed and taken to the optic nerve. So your vision gets affected with high blood sugars, which is called retinopathy. And the changes in retina are permanent. They cannot be reversed. Second is peripheral neuropathy, which is that the blood supply to extremities of our body reduces. So your hands have tingling sensation. A lot of people, the blood doesn't reach the feet because the heart is not pumping blood with so much pressure. And so the blood doesn't reach the feet. So they start having, injuries in their feet that don't heal, eventually creating gangrenes and necrosis. We know of people who need amputations of their legs, because of diabetes. It is a common thing. And the third commonest thing is renal failure or chronic renal disease or nephropathy, as we know that. And Kidney disease also is very scary because once it happens, it's non-reversible. The nephrons of the kidney, which are the cells where the filtration happens, have gone through permanent changes, and it's very difficult for anybody to, it's a sad downhill course, because then you need dialysis, and it's a difficult. That's why when Dr. Jingen was also saying, we don't emphasize enough on keeping our diabetes away. If we do that, we keep all these complications also away from us.
Now, often, like blood pressure, sometimes diabetes is probably symptomless. It doesn't come with a forewarning. Now, what are the classic warning signals one should really look for deeper so that one knows that he is or she is progressing or becoming a diabetic?
Yeah, so one of the most starking, although as you correctly said, diabetes can be completely asymptomatic until your sugars are 400 and you find it out. But for people who have symptoms, one of the most important ones is weight loss, where you start losing a lot of muscle from the body, and there's too much, you lose too much weight, and people keep telling you that you look sick because you're losing too much muscle and weight. That's one. Second is something called polyuria and polydipsia, where you feel excessive thirst and you have to go visit the washroom many times because the kidney is trying to get rid of that sugar by making excessive urine. So you need more water to be replenished. It's polyuria and polydipsia, which is excessive thirst and urination. And the third is very common, is that, a lot of people disregard it. Redness and tingling sensation on the palm and the feet is also a classic marker of high blood sugars. And there are many more, like, for example, some people feel extreme fatigue, some people feel blackout, some people have, a funny feeling like a brain fog in their head. There are many more, but these are some of the ones that most people experience.
Is hypoglycemia also a concern?
Hypoglycemia is actually a far bigger concern than high blood sugars, because it can be literally fatal. If your sugars plummet too low, your brain doesn't get the required oxygen that it requires, and it can be also fatal. Of course, people have episodes where they faint when the sugars go down very, very low. That is why people who are on insulin are extremely particular about what they eat so that the sugars don't go down.
Of late, there is a claim, there's some Indian studies also claiming that raw jackfruit powder is supposed to help in controlling diabetes. Is it true?
Yeah. So when we request our patients to not eat wheat and white rice, they have to eat something as bread. So these are some of the alternatives that we give them: nut flour and vegetable flours. Jackfruit, as a vegetable, not as a fruit, is raw jackfruit. So if you dry and make a powder out of it, it is a vegetable flour. It has no carbohydrate load. So that can be made into a chapati or a roti or a bread. Similarly, we also request people to eat raw plantain flour, which is a small banana, which is raw, and the flour made out of it. So these are good alternatives to the wheat and rice that we typically eat for our meals.
Yeah, before we wind up show, I have another 5 minutes, and Manjari, I request you to just throw a light on the books that you have written.
Thank you for saying that. So I've been, I thought one of the ways to speak to people would be to write. And the first one was more experimental. It's called Eat Up, Clean Up. And it talks about how, you can have a much easier way of eating and cleaner food. The second is Heal with Foods, which is published by Rupa. Heal with Foods has actually now become one of the best sellers. It's doing very well, and it's available across bookstores and e-commerce platforms in India. And I'm now actually working on my third book with Penguin. Hopefully should be out. It's on cancer and what you can do never to get cancer, how you can live a cancer-free life, and what are the things that we can do not to get that. So I'm working on that now. Yeah.
Very, very nice and very inspirational also. I quite remember that you once photographed yourself with the book in one of the airports, the second book. So I think it was wonderful seeing you there. But what has been the response from people? How is it? I think your second book, the experimental one, of course, did well, but the second one really took off.
Yes. So it's still available across airports in India, and it's selling well. I know that because the publisher keeps giving updates, and We also try. I try, and a lot of my friends give it as a gift to their friends. So it's been just very warm. The people have received it very warmly. And hopefully it has helped some people. It basically takes you back to basics of understanding why our food is what it looks like and what are the simple things we can do to really heal our bodies with what we eat. There's a very beautiful, I think Mark Hyman said that whatever we eat, we either feed disease or we feed health. So we choose what we want to feed. So everything that you put in your mouth, you can either feed health or you can feed disease. And we know that at the back of our minds, we are conscious people. We know what we're eating is feeding disease, but somehow we don't use that intelligence and translate it into our actions.
Yeah, as a concluding remark, what would you tell the youngsters regarding diabetes and what should they be taking care of? Of course, food is one of the major aspects, but what is that they should be taking care of, especially people who are in the IT industry, who have a fast life? What should they be doing?
I think the first and foremost thing, sir, is to understand that when your body is giving you cues, you should not disregard it. If you feel that there is anything which is abnormal with you, you feel you're passing too much urine, you feel extreme lethargy or fatigue, you feel a funny headache all the time, you're not able to concentrate on your work, you're losing weight, anything that the body gives you as a cue is something that we must regard, because the symptoms are a marker of a condition. So they have to be regarded and corrected. That's one. Second is that, living healthy is actually not rocket science. In fact, it's something that came most naturally to Indians and many other civilizations across the world. I think if you could just be a little more careful, conscious, mindful with what we do on a daily basis and not postpone health to being sick care, but become proactive about it being, something where we stay healthy instead of, falling into sickness and then talking about health. So proactive health, which is a lot of populations. I mean, I visited Europe, people don't want to get sick because healthcare is out of reach. It's very costly. So I think we have to become more proactive as a nation and start thinking of health instead of thinking of healthcare as sickness care all the time.
Yeah, and another important aspect is avoiding sedentary lifestyle. I think it has been said that sitting is next to cigarettes so far as cancer is concerned. I think that is also extremely important.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Manjit. I think it's wonderful having you as usual, and quite candid remarks and quite useful for people. I think you've broken a lot of myths, which it will continue, of course, but I think we need breaking these bubbles as often as possible. Thank you very much on part of HEAL and also IHL, and we especially thank IHL for supporting this program, because this is very important so far as we are concerned in spreading the right information to the right population, especially the youngsters who probably would have the way to go forward. Thank you very much, Ms. Manjari. As usual, pleasure hosting you. Thank you.
Thank you, Shankar sir. Thank you, HEAL, and thank you everybody who's here. And I hope the message goes across properly, because what you're trying to say is that you can stay healthy. You just have to work on it. That's it.
And all the best for your third book.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.